What's going on there, folks? Good morning, good afternoon, actually, the most out there. It is the Earthmaster here on this Labor Day, Monday, September 5th, 2022. It is about 12:05 p.m. California time here along the West Coast. Latest earthquake shown up there on a very active globe, a 1.3 up into the Alaska region. Notice activity has kind of really backed off here along the West Coast, and we've seen a pretty good increase in activity here overnight across the western Pacific into the Java Trench areas and up into China region. Since then, we did see a westward push of movement pretty nicely throughout the Afghanistan area and now kind of showing up there towards the Mediterranean region. Quite a bit of activity overnight and yesterday as well. We had 3 6-pointers, pretty good sized earthquakes, and the largest one was a 6-point. That was a 6.6 there in the China area. A 6.2 down in the Southeast Pacific Rise, and kind of off the globe right now. But we did have a 6-pointer out here in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, but that's been past 24 hours now. So things very active though, regardless. All right, let's go ahead and check out the latest activity here. On the map, stand by for just a second while we get this thing up and running. Gonna have to get this sorted out for sure already. Window capture, here we go. Just a little bit different than the OBS system that I'm used to, so I'm kind of working with it. Bear with me a little bit. All right, latest activity here across the USGS flat scale Earth model, showing the activity on a broad scale. Remember, yesterday's earthquakes were basically around divergent boundaries, a separation of the seafloor, kind of adding new land out there, so to speak, and also increasing the pressure around certain plate areas like we seen yesterday. California was getting hit pretty hard with quite a few 2s and 3s, and over here in the Atlantic Ocean, of course, we had that. Let's go back to the 7 days, 4.5 and above. We had that 6-pointer out here, 6.9. That was the largest of the 6-pointers. And that is a divergent boundary as well. That adding further plate stress out here towards the east, really ramping things up here, kind of coming together, if you will, in this area around the Himalayas, Java Trench area, and the Fiji Islands area. Seen some quite a bit of activity as well, following all that movement yesterday. Down here in the Kermadec Trench, we did see some activity overnight, including a 5.3. That one at 113 kilometers deep. So a little bit of adjustment definitely taking place there in that region. Also, looks like a little bit further up north, a little bit more shallower earthquake activity with a 4.9. Remember, this is just a prime example here of these little 2 earthquakes, how deeper movement quakes in a subduction zone can add further strain. It just makes sense, right, to add further strain and stress upstream. So if that's the case and there's enough built-up pressure, we see these earthquakes popping off here in sequence, just like we've seen here in the Kermadec Trench area, 4.9, and of course we had that deeper 5.3 prior to that. So since then, within the last hour, we got an earthquake here, 4.6 at 126 kilometers deep. Pretty deep earthquake in this area. And here in the Fiji Tonga region, these earthquakes here were from yesterday's time frame and overnight. Deepest one, we had a 507 kilometer deep, 4.8 in this area. So things really starting to just work its way all over the place globally, so to speak, here with the plate tectonics. Up here in the Izu Trench, some activity yesterday. We haven't seen any further activity here today along this area of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and that includes the Mariana Trench regions and the Philippine Plate. So nothing above 4.0 in this area. Again, this is some older movement activity from yesterday, but things really ramped up in the China area yesterday, 6.6. It seems like just about half an hour to an hour later, we started to see that westward pressure movement here build up further west by about 400, 500 miles here. That definitely showing the increase in activity as a plate as a whole, right? These things are basically just a little piece of the puzzle floating around on some type of liquid, right? If you kind of picture it in your mind, a little bit of adjustment down here ultimately affects and makes some further adjustment in other areas, and sometimes it's thousands of miles away. So things really we're rocking and rolling here in Afghanistan as well. Seen a couple 5s and some 4s out there. The Mediterranean area is having some activity as well. Nothing above the 4.0 threshold right now. That is listed on the EMSC model and the globe, the Earthquake 3D globe. Some movement also up here into the East Pacific Rise. This earthquake happening just a couple hours ago, and it's kind of off the plate boundary. It's more so into the Nazca plate here. Pacific plate, Nazca plate boundary. This earthquake striking. It looks like maybe about 100 miles inland in this area. South America really hasn't seen too much activity ramping up. A couple 4s in the area, it looks like. A 4.9 seems to be a magic number. Some deeper movement last night, it looks like. But still waiting for things to fill in here. But it may be a little while, considering all this westward activity we've been seeing here across the area. The states, okay, let's see what we got for the states. Let's go ahead and start off in Yellowstone. They have added a couple earthquakes here onto the map of the USGS map. And but that's nothing. Not even a little glimpse of what they were popping off last night. Right around 10 to 11 o'clock overnight, Yellowstone was having a major fit, so to speak, in a large sequence of rapid earthquake activity. I'm not talking about these typical normal ones. I'm talking about this cluster of individual quakes here. Just a huge amount of earthquake activity in a short amount of time. Now, again, the largest one I believe they mentioned is a 2.3 at 0459. So 0459 is going to be 0459, probably somewhere in this mix. But it's going to take them a little while to decipher how many earthquakes have struck in here. This appears to be the epicenter of where the activity is striking there at Yellowstone, as far as the swarm goes. And it's at the northern end of the Yellowstone caldera. This activity, of course, showed up across numerous stations in the region. But pinpointing the activity looks as though it's right around the Mary Lake area. If you go up to Norris Junction a little bit, you can kind of see some of the earthquakes in the mix as well. Not as intense, and that kind of leads, and not as many, and that kind of leads me to believe that the epicenter is right around the Mary Lake area. But man, it was pretty crazy last night. I was hesitant about going to bed. I was wanting to keep an eye on it, because when these swarms kick up, and I'm not just like I say, I'm not just talking about the swarm that we've seen over the last 10 days, where we've seen a couple microquakes every hour or so. It's just this activity where it just gets full blown. And it's just rapid. I mean, it's a lot of earthquake activity happening at once. So imagine the stress being played here in the region as far as the activity goes. It's just a lot. USGS Volcanoes did put out a notification through Facebook earlier in regards to the Yellowstone activity. But I'm not for sure if they're talking about the activity that we're noting here on the graphs last night here, as far as this major activity goes. They're stating many people assume that all earthquakes at Yellowstone are due to magma movement, and we know this isn't true. It is well established that pressure variations associated with water flowing through the crust, the outermost layer of the earth, can trigger earthquakes. Now remember, there's been quite a bit of snow up there over the winter. Yes, it has melted. There's been a lot of rainfall soaking into the ground. Of course, they had that flooding up there a couple months back. So these guys are basically saying that all that water and whatnot seeking down into the surface can pressurize fault areas. It says this is because pressurized fluids inside a fault zone can partially counter the force pressuring the two blocks of rock on both sides of a fault together, making it easier for those blocks to slip along the fault, which kind of makes sense, right? In other words, water in faults can help to promote earthquake activity. I think that's why Southern California hasn't really seen that big one yet. But if they get a big soaker, that could definitely lubricate those faults way down below. Water is known to be a cause of earthquakes at Yellowstone and may be important in triggering earthquake swarms, where many earthquakes are clustered in space and time and are not preceded by a large earthquake or main shock. Although moving magma can also trigger earthquakes, this process creates different patterns of seismicity, and triggering by water is thought to be much more common in Yellowstone. So, there's a couple different things you can monitor if we're looking at magma activity. There's gas concentrations, CO2, H2O, and right now, everything looks good far as the concentrations go. Let's see, I'm just reading a couple more things here. So this brings us to another question the USGS Volcanoes is asking. What about the historic floods that occurred in Yellowstone in June 2022? That was a lot of water. It definitely was. Did that event trigger any earthquakes? The answer is probably not. In most places, it takes a long time for water to percolate to depths where earthquakes are likely, usually at least a few miles deep, right? So surface water does take quite a while to get down there, and it doesn't all arrive at the same time. Sometimes it's also possible to trigger earthquakes simply by the weight of the water on the surface stressing rocks below, as is occasionally observed when a new water reservoir is filled. However, compared to large reservoirs that might collect deep water for many months or years, the 2022 floods were much more distributed in space and brief in time, despite their destructiveness at the surface. So, a lot of this could have something to do with the water over the springtime, snow melt. Either way, we'll keep an eye on it. Far as activity goes, though, throughout the morning time frame, it looks as though we've completely backed off from that swarming here, as noted. There's a couple hours of intense earthquake swarming, but I don't see any more throughout the morning or afternoon time frame yet. But again, this kind of just kicked off out of the blue like yesterday, and it's possible we could see it again today. Either way, we'll definitely keep this updated. Looking at the rest of the area, a couple earthquakes this morning in the Northern California area, 2.8. That one at about 16 kilometers down here, just south of the Cascadia megathrust, but inland into the Coast Range at about 16 kilometers. As noted, I barbecuing a brisket out there, smoking one, started at about 8:30 this morning. So I got to definitely keep an eye on it, trying to keep the heat and whatnot down. It's supposed to be 114 degrees today, so. All right, earthquake activity. Again, a little bit of movement around the Bay Area, and most of that 2.5 activity is from yesterday. Looking at the all magnitudes map here, there's not a whole lot showing up here in the last hour, and even this morning time frame. A couple small earthquakes down here in the Brawley seismic zone, but overall, we've seen quite a bit of westward pressure activity here throughout the Fiji Islands area and further around the Himalayas and China area. And if you think about it, it does actually relieve a little bit of stress here in the region. And it's that teeter-totter effect that I chat about here a lot. When this whole area is active, including areas around here, because it's all somewhat connected far as the plates go, even though they're all kind of separate plates, it's still somewhat connected when it comes to building up and releasing pressure as a jigsaw puzzle, so to speak. We do see things quiet down over here along the South America region. Nothing really showing up here across the Middle America Trench. So the West Coast activity is quiet for now. It's dying down. And if you notice, the Yellowstone activity completely died off as well. And that happened right around the time where we seen that earthquake activity there in China kick off. And then a much further, broader area of activity further west around this plate boundary. So things backed off here. The Yellowstone swarm, and the activity along the West Coast. For how long? Who knows? I mean, but it does look like things are just kind of tapering off right now in California area. Yes, there is Still some earthquake movement, but a lot of this is older activity from yesterday, and not a whole lot here showing up in the last couple hours. Further back east, not much at all. Looking at some movement in Arkansas, it looks like a little 2.0. And one earthquake out here along the Appalachian Mountains near Lakeside, Tennessee. But things very quiet out here along the eastern part of the country. Caribbean plate looks pretty quiet as well. Not a whole lot popping off whatsoever in this area. We did see one earthquake here in the northern mid-Atlantic ridge. It's a rift zone up here. It's a divergent boundary. This is actually the fracture area. It looks like Charlie Gibbs fracture zone. And not a big earthquake, but still somewhat active in these divergent boundaries over the last couple days. Let's see what else we got. Tremor activity last night was 0. We'll see how that plays out tonight. It's been 0 for a couple days now. Volcanic seismicity map. We'll check out Mount Hood, since that's see if we got anything rocking and rolling up here. And then I gotta go check on that barbecue. It's gonna be an all-day thing. 114 degrees and barbecuing. Hey, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. There's those S waves. Check out those massive S waves. That's the wavy lines there from that's got to be the earthquake there in China. But notice how these signals are basically, they travel through the earth and around the earth at the surface and through deeper levels. Those bigger earthquakes can make quite the rumble on the earthquake bell, so to speak. Looking at earthquake activity, there's definitely some earthquake movement here. Notice that this is actually looking a lot more active than it has here at Mount Hood Volcano. This is the top of Palmer Lift area. Sometimes equipment turns on and whatnot, but I don't see it today. These are all earthquakes. And USGS did show some activity on the map a couple days ago, but I'm not for sure if they're reporting it this weekend. But either way, there's a good handful of small microquakes there right around the Mount Hood area. We did have a little bit of swarming here. This was over the last 2 days, it looks like, further down south. But nothing listed up here right now. So we'll continue to watch that and monitor that activity. Either way, I think we all can agree things are getting very active right now. Solar weather activity, we did have a low-grade M flare pop off within the last hour or so. Peaked out at about 1.1. Not a big M flare whatsoever, but it did spark off from this departing sunspot. Let's see if I can get this to pop up here. Any day. Going to be this one right here. I believe that is 3089, if I'm correct here. That was the one that was traveling here across the southern portion of the sun. Looking pretty dynamic. In fact, it had a pretty complex magnetic field at one point, but it just really didn't do anything as it was facing Earth. So now it's sparking off a little M flare. So what do we have to deal with right now? Still seeing a little bit of the elevated KP index here from the coronal hole activity that we had been experiencing here. This high-speed solar wind stream brought some awesome conditions there for aurora viewings at the higher latitudes and across northern tier states here in the United States. So pretty cool, pretty lucky for them. So we're seeing a little bit of residual activity kicking up here. It looks like G1 storms possible continuing today and then dropping down after that. But far as sunspot activity goes, let's check out the latest one. Again, none of these really look super complex in development. Far as the Earth side facing ones, that's 3094, 3092, 3093, all just kind of they're sunspots. That's all. But they're not really posing any type of major flare threat at the moment. We'll watch them though in the coming days and see what develops, folks. So yeah, I hope everyone has a good day. We will be back a little bit later on. Again, I'm probably going to be tending to this barbecue for an extended period. Got a point, what have we got? 1.2 coming into SoCal right now, but still, that's very small activity right now. Not a whole lot kicking up in the area of the West Coast. Yellowstone still showing a couple spikes there on that seismograph. But overall, even in that region, things kind of dying down a little bit, so to speak. All right, guys, have a good day. We will be back here a little bit later tonight. enjoy your Labor Day if you have it off. And we will be back here a little bit later tonight, folks. Stay safe.